What is going on, everyone? Sergeant Argerwood here, and today we're going to be reacting to the British-American War, the War of 1812, aka when America decided, you know what? Let's go to war with the British again. And this happened during the Napoleonic Wars, which is interesting. And the reason why you're going to see Britain do kind of not so well, like even though they're the strongest empire in the world, is because they're fighting Napoleon right now. But yeah, I kind of simplified it a lot. There's a lot of other stuff, but yeah, that's what we're here for, right? So, without further ado, let's get started.
In 1812, the young nation of the United States took on the country with the most powerful navy in the world in a war that would affect more than just the former colonies and their colonizer. The United States of America first gained freedom from the British in an 8-year-long Revolutionary War that finally came to a close when Britain inevitably recognized the independence of their 13 former colonies on September 3rd, 1783. One of the most relevant impacts of this war that would fuel future tensions between the US and Britain once again was the role of the Native Americans.
Oh yeah.
And as a
I think this is also called the French and Indian War, or maybe that's something else. I don't think. Yeah, this is also called the French and Indian War, when basically the French got like a bunch of Indians on their, Native Americans on their side, and the British got a bunch. Not as many. Okay, we'll find out.
a fan of our channel, you should check out our friends over at our. We have also named this the watching it, you've documented more about the impressive history of the United States and the United Kingdom, the rivalry between both nations, and the details of the war, also named the Second American War of Independence. This war was very important because it could have changed.
That map is
History as we know it. Because you are our subscriber, we have a special offer for you. If you sign up between
it's still going. But yeah, make sure to subscribe to these guys. They're called Knowledgia, I think. I haven't reacted to them before, I think.
Mostly supported the Brits, who they hoped during the Revolution.
I got it backwards.
The Native Americans mostly supported the Brits,
I'm thinking of something else, never mind.
Who they hoped would continue to restrict expansion from the U.S. settlers into Native American territory. When Britain failed to maintain its rule over the colonies, the United States eventually accelerated its takeover of native land, causing even more friction between the American societies. This friction only grew stronger as the years went on, as Britain remained a driving force of the discord, since not only had the natives taken its side in the Revolution, but the British also openly encouraged the Native Americans to fight back against their antagonists.
Yeah, but not in Canada though. No, that's fine. It's okay that we took land here. Revolt against America instead. Come on, guys. But I get it. I wonder how much of an impact this had though, because this doesn't really talked about very often.
By 1812, this, combined with a few other factors, led to the development of a new war. While the United States was clearly unhappy with the united opposition from Britain and the natives, they were also infuriated.
Oh yeah, I think I know what it's gonna say next. The freaking those darn British ships. They would capture U.S. soldiers, and it was rude.
By allegations that the Royal Navy was utilizing a tactic known as impressment to take U.S. men for their own troops. On top of this, the ongoing strife between Britain and France had a notable impact on the United States, heavily.
Oh, that's hilarious. They try to cut it out, but they couldn't. So there's little pieces from the image that are still there.
Locked in their own struggle, the warring nations tried to restrict trade from neutral countries and punish anyone who attempted to ignore the constraints. This put the United States in a detrimental position due to their inability to continue trade with either nation unless they wanted to risk invoking the wrath of the other side. While France took a more laid-back approach to ensure the US abstained from doing business with the British, the latter was more aggressive about the matter. On January 7th, 1807, Britain issued an order in council stating, "It is hereby ordered that no vessel shall be permitted to trade from one port to another, both which ports shall belong to or be in the possession of France or her allies, or shall be so far under their control as the British vessels may not freely trade." Furthermore, any ships that refused to obey these restrictions would be subject to seizure by the Royal Navy, cargo and all. By November, the original order was expanded.
Cargo too? Whoa.
Now to include all the ports and places of France and her allies, or of any other country at war with His Majesty, and all other ports or places in Europe, from which, although not at war with His Majesty, the British flag is excluded, and all ports or places in the colonies belonging to His Majesty's enemies. In retaliation, France, under the command of Napoleon Bonaparte, issued the Milan Decree, which said that every ship, to whatever nation it may belong, that shall have submitted to be searched by an English ship or to a voyage to England, or shall have paid any tax whatsoever to the English government, is thereby, and for that alone, declared to be denationalized, to have forfeited the protection of its king, and to have become English property. Adding on, Napoleon declared that any of the aforementioned ships that enter French ports or those of French allies are good and lawful prizes of his nation. Forced to reply, U.S. President Thomas Jefferson signed the Embargo Act in December of 1807, blocking all international trade from American ports and taking direct aim at Britain. Unfortunately for America, the act backfired and has turned the U.S. into more of a victim than anyone else. Emphasizing this point, the Minister to France himself even said, "Here it is not felt, and in England it is forgotten." The effects of the Embargo Act ultimately pushed the U.S. into an economic depression, and it had to be repealed less than 2 years after the initial signature. In its place, the Non-Intercourse Act was passed, which directly forbade trade with Britain and France and their colonies. When this new act still proved to be ineffective, the United States tried once again, this time passing Macon's Bill No. 2 in May of 1810. This bill lifted trading bans and stated that if either France or Britain removed their own restrictions, the U.S. would re-establish an embargo with the opposing nation. By August, Napoleon enacted a plan to exacerbate tension between Britain and the United States, and it ultimately worked. He first told the new president, James Madison, that he intended to exempt the U.S. from his previously established Berlin and Milan decrees, promoting Madison to bring back the Non-Intercourse Act constraints against Britain in November of that year. Despite the fact that Napoleon never actually followed through in his proclamation, Britain and the United States were now on the brink of all-out war. The final straw came when the Battle of Tippecanoe unfolded in late 1811 as the U.S. troops claimed victory over the Native Americans, wishing to stop further expansion once again. Given the United States was fairly confident in the belief that the British were supplying the natives with weapons from Canada, a faction of the U.S. Republican Party known as the Warhawks began a heavy push towards an official declaration of war. At last, weapons from Canada, a faction of the U.S. Republican Party
Republican Party didn't even exist until like a long time later. What? Hold on. When was the Republican Party formed? Hello, Siri? When was the Republican Party formed?
Republican Party was formed March 20th, 1854.
See? I told you. Maybe they're talking about the Democratic Republican Party. I think that's what it was called. which was like along from before the Democratic and Republican parties were even a thing. Maybe they're talking about that. I don't know.
Known as the Warhawks, began a heavy push towards an official declaration of war. At last, on June 18, 1812, President James Madison signs the declaration against Britain, despite contention about the issue coming from both the House and Senate. Another problem emerged as well when Britain decided to suddenly repeal their trade restrictions before news of the US declaration of war actually reached the British over a month later. Aware of this delay, Britain decided not to immediately respond to the call of war and waited to see how the Americans would react to their repeals. When the US got wind of this surprising development, they were in turn unsure of how the Brits would react to their declaration of war. Ultimately, the United States decided...
So what, they just like sat there for a few months? How is that going to work?
To follow through on his proclamation and did so by invading Canada, which was a British colony at the time. While the American troops hoped to capture Canadian land to force Britain into negotiation, they had no such success. No one was prepared for war. The British and French had been busy fighting their own battles, and the US military was grossly ill-suited to take on the likes of Britain. The defeats were plenty and humiliating for the Americans. One excessively humbling loss for the US happened when General William Hull surrendered Fort Detroit on August 16, 1812.
They went all the way to Detroit?
And his own army to the British troops and allowed Michigan Territory to be deemed as part of Britain.
Jeez. Can we just, like, take a minute to just appreciate how powerful the British were at this point? They literally held off the United States, which I guess wasn't really, like, insanely powerful at the time at all. But still, they held off the United States, and at the same time, they were at war with France, one of, like, probably the most powerful country in the world at the time, arguably.
Chased across the Canadian border as Hull saw the size of his opponent's forces, which was a mix of British and Native American troops, and knowing that his daughter and grandchild were in the fort, he decided to give up without a single shot being fired. Hull's disgraceful failure led to an uptick in Native American raids in the Northwest and British conflict under the...
Oh, Detroit isn't as far as I thought, okay. I thought they went, like, all the way down there or something like that.
Command of Major General Henry Proctor. Adding insult to injury, U.S. Brigadier General Henry Dearborn struggled to make any progress on the northeastern border because the militias in New England were not supportive of the war and uninterested in coming together for an attack on Montreal. By October, the Americans were finally able to get some momentum as Major General Stephen von Rensselaer led an army of 3,100 militiamen into the Battle of Queenston Heights. Rensselaer sent some advanced units across the river where they were able to hold their ground for some time on a slope just above Queenston and were successful until they were overcome by British forces as the rest of the American troops refused to join the fight. 925 U.S. soldiers were then captured by the British, despite Major General Isaac Brock on the British side being killed during the battle. Yet again, the Americans took another hit in 1813 when an attempt to retake Detroit resulted in a massacre of U.S. prisoners by their Native American opponents. On top of that, Brigadier General Henry Dearborn was replaced by Major General James Wilkins. At long last, though, in September of 1813, U.S. Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry scored a major naval victory at Lake Erie against the forces of British Captain Robert Barclay and opened the gates for more success on the American side. When the Battle of the Thames erupted the following month, the U.S. finally defeated the British and Native American allied forces.
Why? Why is this happening all of a sudden? They're just winning a bunch of times.
The next spring season, at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, a U.S. militia force faced off with a Native American force known as the Red Sticks and found victory once again, demanding that the losing side cede roughly 23 million acres of land, which would later become Alabama and span partially into Georgia.
Jeez.
Another win for the United States followed in the summer, July of 1814, at the Battle of Chippewa, but it was short-lived, as the Battle of Lundy's Lane ended in a bloody stalemate shortly after, forcing the Americans to withdraw. The real deciding...
You know, it's so funny, like, you could make a case for, like, each person being good or bad in the situation. Like, the British, they were being rude with, like, their trade and stuff, and, like, capturing Americans. But the Americans were being rude to the natives. So, like, it's funny, there's, like, an argument for each thing on whether who's justified and who's not justified.
Factor in the war came when Napoleon faced his first exile, allowing Britain...
Oh, what? What are you talking about? That didn't happen until like 1815. What? Hold on. When did the War of 1812 end?
It happened from June 1812 to February 17, 1815.
Oh goodness. Okay. Oh no. Oh no.
to shift more focus to the discord with the United States.
Oh no, that looks bad. I know the White House gets burned down. Yeah, how the heck does, like, they invade all the way in Washington, D.C.? I wondered, like, I thought, like, at first I was confused. Like, how is Canada gonna go all the way down there? But no, apparently they just did it by sea. Jesus, that's a lot of people, it looks like.
British sliced through the U.S., destroying government buildings, including the White House, as they took control of Washington, D.C. The Brits...
Oh, because I hear people say they were Canadians destroyed, burned down the White House. So I guess it's not. It's the British that did. Okay, that's good enough.
Then tried to push farther into Baltimore by September under the authority of General Robert Ross, but were repulsed at the Battle of North Point, where General Ross was killed. In the battle that inspired the U.S. national anthem, more British troops were fought off at Fort McHenry. As these conflicts raged on, peace talks began in Ghent and eventually resulted in a signed treaty on December 24th, 1814. Still, just as with the declaration of war, the news was delayed and took until February 18th, 1815 to officially be ratified and end the war. The Treaty of Ghent reverted things back mostly to how they were before the combat, with a status quo antebellum. All territory was returned. Britain repealed their trade restrictions, stopped supporting the Native American revolts, and ended their impressment strategies. In the end,
So I guess technically the United States won because they got what they wanted.
the war was essentially a draw, and the only
Well, not really. The UK didn't get what they want, but the US did. Like, if you look at it tactically, then yeah, the British completely annihilated them, like almost everywhere. But I mean, like, in the end, like, the United States got what they want out of the war. So I guess they won. I don't know.
real losing side was the Native Americans, who had high hopes for British help in stopping U.S. expansion. Britain was able to claim victory against the French, and in a way, against the U.S. Meanwhile, the U.S. had the pride of more or less winning their second war of independence.
Yeah, after the War of 1812, there was this thing called the Era of Good Feelings, where basically there was a wave of patriotism, and then the United States economy got very good, and there was high morale and all of that, which is cool. So, yeah, I think it's kind of funny, like, literally, the United States becomes, like, powerful only because of wars, like, it seems. After the War of 1812, they became powerful, and they increased morale in their economy. And then same thing happened with after World War I and World War II, where they became a world superpower. Kind of interesting. But yeah, thank y'all for watching. If y'all want me to watch Knowledgia, make sure to subscribe, and I will definitely get to that. But yeah, thank y'all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it and subscribe to my channel, and turn on the notification bell thingy. And if you didn't, then make sure to leave a thumbs down. But yeah, that would be greatly appreciated. And while you're at it, go ahead and watch my other videos. They're probably just as good, and if not better than this one right now. Except for my oldest videos, don't watch those. And, subscribe to these people down here, my fellow sergeants. They're other YouTubers that I either know or I have in high regards. Yeah, even my cat agrees. So, thank you for watching, and have a great day.